You know, when you think about the business world, what usually comes to mind? Stock charts, right? Product launches, quarterly earnings, that kind of stuff. But let me tell you, sometimes it's way more like a high-stakes combat zone, a real-life drama with heroes, villains, and plot twists you would not believe. So, lights, camera, action. The story we're getting into today is exactly that, a corporate drama, and a pretty hostile one at that. The main actors here aren't on some Hollywood set. Nope. They're in the boardroom. We're talking about some of the biggest tycoons in the country, all fighting for total control. And this is where it gets really, really interesting. This is a story about the hero becoming the victim, and then, in a crazy twist, the victim becoming the villain. It's this wild saga about a company that spent decades just trying to survive, only to become the very monster it used to fight. All right, so let's set the stage. Our story kicks off with Larsen and Toubro, or L&T as you probably know them, India's biggest engineering firm. Now, for decades, L&T wasn't just a company. It was a prize, a giant, cash-rich, powerful company that, you guessed it, everyone wanted a piece of. They were basically the perennial target, constantly under siege. I mean, just look at this. For almost 20 solid years, L&T was constantly on the defense. It was just relentless. First up, in the early 80s, you have this so-called Black Knight, Manu Chhabria, trying to buy up shares for a hostile takeover. Then in 88, the Ambanis show up, pretending to be the White Knight coming to the rescue. And if that wasn't enough, in 2001, the Birlas come sniffing around, eyeing their super valuable cement business. It was just one thing after another. Okay, so you've got these two knights, right? But they were totally different kinds of threats. Manu Chhabria, the Black Knight, was pretty straightforward. He was the enemy at the gates, no secrets there. But Dhirubhai Ambani? Now, he was way more dangerous. He was the White Knight who gets invited inside the castle as a friend, a savior, only for you to find out he's been plotting a coup from the inside the whole time. So much more insidious. And believe me, this betrayal wasn't just about power. It was about cold, hard cash. Get this. The Ambanis took a grant of 570 crores from L&T's own bank account. They even made L&T buy shares in their own company, Reliance. It couldn't have been more obvious. They weren't there to help L&T. They were there to help themselves to L&T's money. So, after all this drama with raiders and traders, L&T was desperate for a real hero. And guess what? They found one, right inside their own company. CEO AM Naik. And his plan? Absolutely genius. He rallied the employees and basically turned them into the owners by creating the L&T Employee Trust. With the whole company behind him, he strikes a deal with the Birlas. He says, look, you can have the cement division you want, but you leave the rest of L&T alone. And just like that, they were finally independent. And for a second there, it really felt like a fairy tale ending, right? The company in distress is finally safe. But this is where our story takes a massive U-turn, because the company that played the victim for so long was about to become the hunter. See, all those years of fighting had an unexpected side effect. It made L&T not just tough, but seriously rich. They were sitting on a war chest of, wait for it, over $2 billion in cash. And you know what they say about that kind of money? It doesn't just sit in a bank account gathering dust. So let me ask you this. After decades of being on the defense, just fighting to survive, what do you do when you're suddenly safe, powerful, and loaded with cash? Do you take a breath? Relax? Or do you use everything you learned in the trenches? Well, L&T decided to go on the attack. The company that had basically perfected the art of defense realized, hey, maybe it's time to play offense. And just like that, the hunted became the hunter. And they didn't just pick some small-time target either. No, their radar locked onto Mindtree, a really successful software company. And what happened next was literally historic. It became the first ever hostile takeover in India's entire IT industry. And who was behind it? The one company that knew exactly what it felt like to be on the receiving end. So you're probably asking, how did they pull it off? Well, it all came down to Mindtree's big weakness, which you can see right here. The founders, the people who actually built the company from scratch, they only owned about 13%. That's not a lot. It's definitely not enough to stop a takeover, especially when there's this huge 20% chunk owned by just one person, who was in a really tight spot. And that one person was VG Siddhartha, the founder of Cafe Coffee Day. I'm sure you know it. Well, he was in a mountain of debt, both personally and for his business, and he was desperate for cash. He had to sell his 20% stake in Mindtree. For a predator like L&T, this was blood in the water. It wasn't just an opportunity, it was the perfect opening, and they absolutely pounced. L&T's game plan was just clinical. It was brutally effective. Just 4 simple steps. Step 1, grab VG Siddhartha's massive 20% stake. That's the key. Step 2, go out and buy another 25% on the open market. Step 3, put out an open offer to everyone else who owns shares. And step 4, lock it down. Secure a controlling 60%. Boom. It was a textbook hostile takeover. And here's the final score. The plan worked like a charm. L&T walked away with a commanding 60% of the company. Game over. The battle was won. Mindtree, which was this great independent success story, was now officially an L&T company. This is what it all boils down to. Look at the 2 sides of the same company. On one hand, you have L&T, the victim, right? The one that fought off takeovers, looked for a white knight, and leaned on its employees to survive. Then you have L&T, the villain, the one that launched a hostile takeover, exploited a founder's weakness, and used its cash like a weapon. The transformation is just complete. So as the final curtain falls, this wasn't just some business deal you read about in the papers. This was the end of an era. For the founders of Mindtree, of course, but also for L&T. The company had completely changed its identity. The final act of this whole devious drama was over. And there was a real human cost to all this. After the takeover was complete, the founders of Mindtree, the folks who had poured their entire lives into building this company from nothing, they all resigned. For them, that was it. The journey was over. The company they created was no longer theirs. And maybe that's the biggest takeaway here. We see the logos, we watch the stock tickers, but we almost never see the tricky games happening behind the curtains. It's like the source material says. Mind you, these business games are indeed devious, and you really can't argue with that. So I'll leave you with this final thought. When you look at L&T's whole incredible story, from victim to aggressor, can you really call them a hero or a villain? Or in the dog-eat-dog world of business, do those words even mean anything? At the end of the day, is there only one thing that actually matters? Just being the winner?